Southern demagogues selling fascism wrapped in the vernacular of ordinary folk. Brother betraying brother, deadly viruses spreading through cities, racism poisoning the very air people breathe, the everyman collapsing with a bang one would not expect from his lean figure. You will find them in all the king's men, panic in the streets, the sound of fury, thieves' highway, and crossfire, the existentially bleak yet artistically brilliant films of a new Hollywood. A major shift is already detectable in all these films. During the first 15 years of sound cinema, the beating heart of leftist filmmaking had been the writers. Now it was time for the innovative directors with strong leftist leanings to assume that role. Filmmakers who could make iconoclastic political films regardless of the intricacies of the script, adding nuance and creating meaning through both interpretation and mise-en-scène. They included Robert Rossen, Elia Kazan, John Berry, and Joseph Losey. Others emerged triumphantly from the B-movie factory. Jules Dassin, Edward Dmytryk, Cy Enfield, and Michael Gordon entering a world of politically conscious cinema. Among them were future blacklistees, exiles, and friendly witnesses. Their impact in building a solid bridge between old Hollywood and the new, sober, grim, realist, and formally evolved cinema, was immense. To use Abraham Polonsky's phrase, they were landmarks in the fog of escapism and the gimmick plot attitude of the usual movie. For instance, Brian Neave sees the cinema of the radical leftist Robert Rossen as an indication of some of the ways in which the Hollywood left took advantage of post-war conditions to articulate a tougher and meaner perspective on the distortions of American business and political structures. For the first time, these filmmakers could flourish both inside and outside the restrictive studio environment. The latter thanks to the formation of independent and talent-owned companies that belonged to creative people rather than banks. One such studio, Enterprise, which leased studio space and released through United Artists and MGM, produced some of the key films of the Hollywood left, such as Force of Evil and Body and Soul, bringing together leftists like John Garfield, Louis Milestone, Abraham Polonsky, and Robert Rossen. The fact that Enterprise's more celebrated output was crime films, while its flops were comedies, is no coincidence. Crime was the new laboratory of the left for testing the limits of the system. One of the first full explorations of using film noir as an attack on capitalism, however, came from a Hollywood old-timer who had been making films since the silent era.
Frank Tuttle's importance as a communist comes from the fact, first, that he is recognized as a very capable motion picture director, and, moreover, he is considered to be an excellent teacher of motion picture methods.
The first serious appraisal of Frank Tuttle was not penned by a critic, it was a summation by an FBI agent who had Tuttle under surveillance.
So you're a copper's girl.
Who told you that?
He was here looking for you, and you'd better stay away from me.
Veronica Lake, who burst on the screen like a blonde bombshell. Alan Ladd, who's dynamite with a gun or a girl. Together, they blast all screen traditions in This Gun for Hire.
A Paramount star director with a knack for comedies, Tuttle's work mutated into something darker during the war. Even if his political line was Boy Scout materialism, that did not stop him from injecting progressive ideas into his films, which in one case redefined crime cinema. Based on a 1936 novel by Graham Greene about an assassin hired to kill a government minister, only to find himself double-crossed by his contractor, Tuttle's This Gun for Hire, 1942, invented cinema's angelic killer. For that aim, Tuttle personally invited the communist writer Albert Maltz for his first Hollywood assignment, which Maltz later called A Harmony of Attitudes. This was highly uncommon to have A, directors selecting their own writers, and B, directors working closely with writers. Tuttle and Maltz moved crime from dingy bootleggers' joints, dirty Bowery streets, and seedy neighbourhoods into corporate buildings with shiny handrails and swinging doors that twisted the fate of millions of Americans. Hidden behind the gentrified dignity of big business, they planted a suffocating sense of crookedness and corruption. This Gun for Hire was followed by a series of even more scathing and visually bleak films, particularly after the war. Deadline at Dawn, 1946, directed by theatre heavyweight Harold Clurman, also uses a literary source, here Cornell Woolrich, but shifts its focus and meaning in the writing. In the script written by another left theatre giant, Clifford Odets, a minor character in Woolrich's novel, a cab driver played by Paul Lucas, is transformed into the film's main protagonist. Odets adds a pleasingly eerie rhyming quality to the dialogue, like when someone says, "You're pulling some sort of trick, but I'm too tired to think." He fills it with proletarian sharpness and poetic innuendo with lines such as, "You sigh like the end of summer." The left's noir unleashed a colloquial language that rubbed one's nose against the foreboding grime of the city. Language had grease on it and smelled of rum. Films like Deadline at Dawn and Force of Evil fashioned a pointed gloom about the misery that walked the city at night. Here, Imogen Sarah Smith on Force of Evil's remarkable analysis of the American political economy.
Force of Evil opens with a high-angle shot down a lower Manhattan canyon and the words, "This is Wall Street," making plain from the start the link between an illegal nickel-and-dime lottery and the world's financial hub. Gambling and the stock market are ways of making money from money, abstract numerical systems that have real flesh-and-blood consequences. Polanski and his comrades presciently exposed the fundamental amorality and destructiveness of financialization, which has monstrously evolved into today's private equity, cryptocurrency, and prediction markets. Garfield plays Joe Morse, a shrewd lawyer who devises a scheme for his boss, Tucker, to take over the city's independent numbers banks and force them into a combination. One small bank is owned by Joe's estranged older brother Leo, in a warren of cramped, shabby rooms where coins churn through sorting machines. What to Tucker and his associates is a lucrative racket starts with the small change that working people throw away on a dream of sudden wealth and escape from dead-end lives. The brothers bond, poisoned by resentment and guilt, yet rooted in fierce loyalty, is the emotional heart of the film. Garfield is all glib charm and biting cynicism, a slick facade that crumbles away to reveal the fear and cornered animal instincts of a street kid. The sweat stands out on his brow as Joe realizes, like so many of Huack's targets, that his phone is tapped.
Noir even anticipated the arrival of the Cold War by showing an international network of treachery in films such as Cornered, 1945. Directed by Edward Dmytryk and produced by Adrian Scott, both future blacklistees, in Cornered the war is over, but not fascism, nor the fear it instilled, which now spreads in places that were never a part of the war, from Bern to Buenos Aires. When the fiancé of a man played by Dick Powell is murdered by the Nazis, his quest for revenge sends him along Nazi rat lines, where he encounters comfortably living, duplicitous former Nazis who have now successfully rejoined the ruling class. The Cold War and the inevitable swing it brought in the US to the right expedited the plight of the America First faction. President Truman had already instituted loyalty checks for federal employees, resulting in some people being fired for their political beliefs. Blended with this were anti-Semitic sentiments. One of the right's main fears was that the predominantly Jewish Hollywood moguls lacked the fortitude to defend Americanism. Elements such as the Korean War, China, and the Russian atom bomb, as well as the Rosenbergs affair, intensified communist fears and spiralled them into paranoia. Truman was soft on the commies. Atom bomb secrets were allegedly handed over by liberals to Russia, and Henry Wallace was said to have been recruited by the Soviets while in Siberia. At one point, even in 1940, Hoover speculated that the first incarnation of HUAC might itself have been a communist front. Poor business in the motion picture industry was partly blamed on films having become too political and messagey. In 1947, as the HUAC hearings commenced, movie attendance figures suffered their first major slump. Wall Street, nervous about the $60 million invested in Hollywood, demanded guarantees that films likely to provoke picket lines, such as Mission to Moscow, would no longer be made, that Hollywood would go easy on serious films. Reds were bad for business. At the same time, there was an insane amount of lobbying behind the scenes. The Pope, for one, confided to Will Hayes that Stalin had ordered communists to infiltrate the film industry. Catholics had previously picketed in front of cinemas showing blockade because for them, the subject of the film, the Spanish Civil War, was not about democracy versus fascism, it was about Christianity versus communism. The campaign against the Hollywood left was carefully orchestrated by various players over a long period of time. The first major civilian entity that paved the way for Inquisition was the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. As the war was still ongoing, on the 4th of February 1944, 100 people from the motion picture industry, including Walt Disney, director Sam Wood, and Ginger Rogers' mother, Layla, launched their anti-communist crusade. The Motion Picture Alliance did not last long. The diligence of progressive Hollywood and their effective counteroffensive pushed them into a silent corner for a while. But they managed to resurrect after a hiatus, returning with a series of lectures and a manual published in 1947 called Screen Guide for Americans, written by Ayn Rand. In the Screen Guide, Rand set out her own 13 commandments for protecting capitalism. Don't take politics lightly. Don't smear the free enterprise system. Don't smear industrialists. Don't smear wealth. Don't smear the profit motive. Don't smear success. Don't glorify failure. Don't glorify depravity. Don't deify the common man. Don't glorify the collective. Don't smear an independent man. Don't use current events carelessly. Don't smear American political issues. Probably only the Lassie films featuring a popular MGM dog and set in Yorkshire, England managed to fully abide by the rules, mostly because dogs don't talk. The theoretical line of the MPA was simple: to list all those who had criticised what the MPA considered unquestionable American values. It was not a critique of a critique. It was a fear of criticism. Rand also wrote, "You cannot expect communists to remain neutral and not to insert their own ideas into their work. Let us put an end to their use of our pictures, our studios, and our money for the purpose of preaching our expropriation, enslavement, and destruction. Freedom of speech does not imply that it is our duty to provide a knife for the murderer who wants to cut our throats."
The growing menace of communism arouses the House of Representatives Un-American Activities Committee. Among the well-informed witnesses testifying is J. Edgar Hoover, head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Hoover speaks with authority on the subject.
The Communist Party of the United States is a fifth column, if there ever was one. It is far better organized than were the Nazis in occupied countries prior to their capitulation.
If anyone provided a knife, it was the FBI, whose chief believed the Communist Party was a fifth-column organization. The FBI remains the main source of information for the Motion Picture Alliance. The names were obtained through years of surveillance during and after the war. FBI had a large network of informants in the film industry, comprised of both believers and opportunists. FBI agents also conducted textual readings of films in search of subversive messages. Frank Capra's now ultimate Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life, represented a rather obvious attempt to discredit bankers. Chaplin's Monsieur Verdoux was labelled anti-capitalist propaganda, and William de Terles's sympathetic portrayal of the Republicans during the Spanish Civil War in Blockade was deemed a communist film from start to finish. The agents even studied the classics, and during retrospective screenings were reportedly shocked to discover that Erich von Stroheim's greed showed how the pursuit of money corrupts all human values. What these films had in common was that they were made by foreign-born filmmakers: Italian, British, German, and Austrian. Most FBI assessments and reports from this period reeked of xenophobia. The Bureau, which estimated that roughly 600 communists were employed in the motion picture industry, even hired people to steal scripts from studios in order to analyse them for red poison. Sometimes the stories were misleadingly interpreted or misremembered. For instance, regarding The Glass Wall, directed by Maxwell Shane, it is claimed that the refugee character on the run in New York is saved only when the United Nations intervenes. In reality, however, the United Nations building is empty at the end. Nobody comes to the rescue of the refugee played by Vittorio Gassman. In terms of identifying subversive films, any film titled Red and disliked by the Hearst Press or liked by the communist newspaper The Daily Worker was considered definitely red. In the FBI's monitoring of Daily Worker reviews, any mention of the word peace was cause for alarm. The pacifist Western Broken Arrow was cited because the Communist Party had hailed the film as speaking for peace. The FBI also followed Ayn Rand's guidance on subversive movies. The St. Petersburg-born Rand, who left Russia only in 1926, criticised Song of Russia because people smiled in the film, whereas she claimed, "Nobody smiles in that land." After a period of intense finger-pointing and smearing, finally it was time for HUAC to step in. With daggers previously hidden under the cloak of American institutions now revealed under camera flashes. On the 26th of May, 1938, the House Committee on Un-American Activities was established to investigate alleged disloyalty and subversive activities on the part of private citizens, public employees, and organisations suspected of having communist or fascist ties. The latter, however, was never taken seriously. It was chaired by Martin Dies Jr. and therefore became known as the Dies Committee. Its random and sparse hearings since 1938 included testing the loyalty of the 10-year-old Shirley Temple. In January 1945, HUAC became a standing, permanent committee, and its activities resumed in 1947. They started by investigating various industrial strikes that had taken place recently. They also looked into Hollywood, with the aim to purge Hollywood Reds. A preliminary hearing in Los Angeles in May to June 1947 invited friendly witnesses who wanted to demonstrate to the public that A. Yes, there was an insidious move by communists in Hollywood that had to be countered. B. The cream of Hollywood was innocent. And C. It was mostly writers who were guilty.
I believe firmly that the producers, the heads of the studios in Hollywood, would be and are more than willing to do everything they can to rid Hollywood of communists and fellow travelers.
These so-called friendly witnesses were, in reality, professed anti-communists and included Robert Taylor, Adolphe Menjou, and Layla Rogers. They were also informers in broad daylight, naming those they suspected of being communists without providing any evidence. Some of the people whose names they uttered were subsequently subpoenaed for hearings scheduled in Washington in October 1947. Known as the Hollywood 19 after a vicious article in the Hollywood Reporter, the filmmakers and writers named as communists quickly began fortifying their position at the house of one of the 19, Louis Milestone. There they met with lawyers to adopt a strategy for their defence. They examined a few possibilities. The first approach was to refuse to answer any questions and to reject the committee's right to interrogate anyone about their political beliefs. The problem was that this would prevent them from presenting their case to the public. The second approach was equally provocative. To acknowledge membership of the Communist Party, which was, at least in theory, fully legal, the danger lay in the largely unused Smith Act of 1940, under which communists could be prosecuted for advocating the overthrow of the government. This option was also impractical because some of the Hollywood 19, such as Howard Koch, were not communists. The third possibility was simply to deny Communist Party membership. That, however, risked prosecution for perjury, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The fourth option, and arguably the safest, was to invoke the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, which protects individuals from self-incrimination. Some objected that this tactic might imply guilt. The fifth and final strategy in confronting the House Un-American Activities Committee rested on the First Amendment and its protection of free speech. This argument held that HUAC's inquiry was itself an attack on free expression and therefore illegitimate. After prolonged debate, however, they settled on using the First Amendment. Then they got on a plane and headed to Washington, D.C., unaware of the political massacre that awaited them.
The retrospective on Hollywood Left and the Blacklist, featuring more than 40 titles, will take place at the Locarno Film Festival in August 2026.
Red and Black, Hollywood Left and the Blacklist was written and produced by Ehsan Khoshbacht, presented by Eve P. Thompson, sound design by Rob Sharika.